The courtroom was already full when Ellen Dray walked in carrying a metal toolbox by its handle. People had driven from both ends of the county. A retired surveyor named Ben Whitmore sat in the front row with a rolled map on his lap. Two women from the Historical Society had claimed seats before the doors opened. The court clerk had already turned away a dozen people at the fire marshal's limit. Word had spread that Marcus Webb, the developer who had purchased 400 acres north of the Dray farm, was claiming ownership of Ellen's western 12 acres based on a defect in a deed from 1974. The 12 acres included Ellen's hay barn, her equipment shed, and the access road to her remaining property. Without them, the farm was landlocked. Most people already knew how deed disputes ended. When a developer with a title company and two surveyors challenges a farmer with a toolbox, the developer usually wins. But Ellen Dray didn't look worried, because she had carried that toolbox to every property hearing for 2 generations, and this was the first time she'd needed to open it. The bailiff stopped her at the door. "Ma'am, what's in the box?" Ellen set it down. The toolbox was old, dented green metal, scratched with a latch that stuck. A kind of box that had lived in a barn for 50 years. "Evidence," Ellen said. The bailiff looked skeptical. Ellen's attorney, a woman named June Tanaka, who had spent 20 years in property law before moving to the valley, handed him a document. He read it, lifted the toolbox to feel its weight, and stepped aside. "Don't open it until the judge says." Ellen carried the box inside and set it beneath the defense table. The latch scraped against the floor. Across the aisle, Marcus Webb's legal team occupied 4 chairs. 2 boundary attorneys, a title analyst, and Webb himself, a tall man in a cashmere coat who built subdivisions and didn't farm. He had 2 surveys, a corrected deed, and a laptop open to a satellite image of the disputed boundary. He looked at the toolbox and leaned toward his attorney. "That's what she brought. I bought buildings with more paperwork than that." His attorney smiled. Marcus Webb had purchased the 400-acre parcel north of Ellen's farm 12 months earlier. During his title review, his attorney found a discrepancy. The 1974 deed transferring Ellen's property from her mother listed the western boundary as the tree line running north-south, but the tree line had shifted over decades. Storms, disease, but replanting, and a current survey placed the line 12 acres further east than Ellen's fence. Webb filed a quiet title action claiming the 12 acres west of the current tree line had never legally been conveyed to the Dray family. His surveyor confirmed the deed said, "Tree line." The tree line was here, and the Drays had been farming land they didn't technically own. The case was clean, on paper. At a neighborhood meeting, Webb had said, "I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just reading the deed. If the boundary was wrong, that's not my fault. That's the surveyor's fault from 50 years ago." He did not mention that the 12 acres happened to contain the only road access to Ellen's remaining property. The Dray farm had occupied 84 acres since 1919. Ellen's grandmother, Marion Dray, had homesteaded the original parcel. Her mother, Helen, expanded it. Ellen had worked the land since she was 16. The western boundary had never been the tree line. It had been a fence built in 1919 by Marion Dray and the neighbor to the west, a family named Greer, using hand-forged iron stakes driven into the ground at each corner and turn. The 2 families had agreed on the boundary, built the fence together, and never disputed it. The 1974 deed had been written by a county clerk who didn't visit the property. He used tree line because it was visible on an aerial photograph. No one corrected it because no one needed to. The fence was the boundary everyone honored, until Marcus Webb read the deed and saw an opportunity. Ellen told June Tanaka the boundary was never the tree line. It was the fence, and the fence was never moved. June asked, "How far back can you prove the fence existed?" Ellen thought, "My grandmother built it in 1919 with the Greer family. They used hand-forged iron stakes at every corner and turn. The stakes are still in the ground. How do you know they're still there? Because I hit one with a post auger 6 years ago. Couldn't get the drill, bastard. My husband dug down and found the old iron stake, still driven in solid, 3 feet below grade. We left it there and drilled next to it. June considered this. If we can prove those original stakes are still in position at the fence line, not the tree line, we can establish the boundary through physical evidence that predates the deed by 55 years. She hired a metal detection specialist named Corey Walsh. He scanned along Ellen's entire western fence line over 2 days. At every corner post and every third line post, his detector flagged iron anomalies 18 to 36 inches below grade. Hand-forged iron, Corey said. Consistent with early 20th century fencing hardware. These aren't modern rebar or wire. These are forged stakes. June also hired a dendrochronologist to examine a section of cedar post that Ellen pulled from a corner position that needed replacing anyway. The growth rings dated the cedar to 1915-1920, consistent with a fence built in 1919. The evidence was building, but June wanted something more, something the judge could hold. "What else do you have from your grandmother's time?" June asked. Ellen led her to the barn. In a corner, on a shelf above the tool bench, sat a green metal toolbox. Dented, scratched, the latch corroded from decades of barn humidity. Ellen opened it. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, 2 iron stakes her grandmother had kept as spares. A length of chain from the original gate. Her mother Helen's farm journal. And at the bottom a black and white photograph of Marion Dray and Mr. Gurr standing beside the freshly built fence in 1919. "My grandmother kept everything," Ellen said. "She said a farmer who doesn't keep records is a farmer who loses land." June looked at the toolbox. "Bring the whole thing." June drove out to the property the next day. Ellen met her at the gate, the same gate where a chain had hung since 1943. The old padlock was still attached, rusted shut, stamped with Mueller Hardware S. 1938. They walked the western boundary together. The wire fence was still standing. Not the original wire, which had been replaced twice, but the posts were in the same positions they'd always been. Some were cedar, hand-cut, some were newer, steel. But every post sat in the same hole, on the same line that Marion Dray had established in 1919. June stopped at the southwest corner. "Is this where the original stakes were?" Ellen nodded. "My grandmother drove them in herself. Iron stakes, hand-forged by the blacksmith in town. She used them instead of wood because she said wood rots, but iron remembers." June knelt down. The ground around the fence post was compacted from decades of use. She could see the edge of something metallic about 2 inches below the surface. The top of an iron stake still in the ground, buried by 90 years of soil accumulation. "We need a metal detector," June said. They hired a specialist from the state university. He walked the entire fence line with a ground-penetrating scanner. At every post position, 12 in total along the western boundary, the scanner registered a ferrous metal anomaly. The original iron stakes were still underground, even where the posts above them had been replaced with newer materials. June also hired a dendrochronologist to examine a section of cedar post that Ellen had pulled from a corner position during a fence repair 15 years earlier. Ellen had saved it. She saved everything, the way her mother had taught her. The growth rings dated to 1915-1920, consistent with a tree cut and shaped before the 1919 installation. But the strongest evidence wasn't underground or in a lab. It was in the barn. Ellen's mother Helen had kept a farm journal, a leather-bound book with a cracked spine that she'd written in nearly every day from 1958 to 2001. Helen recorded everything: rainfall, crop yields, cattle health, equipment repairs, and property boundaries. June spent an afternoon reading the journal. She found 17 separate entries referencing the western fence line. Each one described maintenance, repair, or observation of the fence, never the tree line. The most significant entry was from September 1972, when a new county survey clerk had visited the property. Ellen had written, "New survey clerk came by. Drew the tree line on a map. Told him the boundary is the fence, not the trees." He shrugged. Said the aerial photo showed trees. I said the ground shows a fence. He left. The fence is still where Mother put it. June closed the journal and looked at Ellen. Your mother documented the exact moment the clerical error was made, and she told them it was wrong. They ignored her. That was my mother, Ellen said. She was right about most things. People just didn't listen. They'll listen now, June said. Bring the toolbox. Ellen went to the barn. On the top shelf, behind a row of oil cans, sat the green metal toolbox her mother had used for farm tools and her grandmother had used for boundary maintenance. Ellen opened it. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were the items that 3 generations of Dray women had kept for exactly this kind of day. June said, "Can you prove where the original fence posts were?" Ellen looked at the toolbox. "I can prove more than that." June filed a defense based on boundary by acquiescence, the legal doctrine that when neighbors treat a visible boundary as the property line for an extended period, that boundary becomes legally binding regardless of what the deed says. Webb's attorneys called it irrelevant. The deed was the deed. June hired a metal detection specialist and a dendrochronologist. The metal specialist scanned along Ellen's fence line and found iron anomalies at every post position, even where posts had rotted and been replaced with newer wood. The originals were still underground. The dendrochronologist examined a section of cedar post that Ellen had pulled from a corner position. The growth rings dated to 1915-1920. Ellen also brought the toolbox. The mudding of the mud was the first thing she fee. He wore a pressed shirt and carried a leather portfolio. A reporter asked for comment. "I respect farmers," Webb said, "but property law is property law. The deed says tree line. The tree line is where my surveyor says it is. This isn't personal." Inside, he told his attorney, "She brought a toolbox. We brought GPS coordinates. Let's wrap this up." Now the final hearing had arrived. The judge opened the proceedings at 9:40 a.m. Standing room only. Webb's team presented the 1974 deed, the current tree line survey, the satellite overlay. Each document was precise. "The deed is unambiguous," counsel summarized. "The boundary is the tree line. The tree line is here. The 12 acres west of it belong to my client." The judge turned. "Defense?" June stood. "One exhibit, Your Honor. One toolbox." Ellen stood. She lifted the toolbox onto the evidence table. The metal scraped the wood. She looked at the judge. "May I open it?" "Go ahead." She unlatched the lid. It swung back with a creak that carried through the silent courtroom. Inside, a row of objects laid side by side, each wrapped in cloth. Webb leaned forward. His smile faded. Ellen unwrapped the first cloth. 2 iron stakes, each about 16 inches long, rough forged with hammer marks visible. Dirt still clung to the bases. June said, "These are the original boundary stakes driven into the ground in 1919 by Marion Dray and the Greer family. They were pulled from the exact positions where metal detection confirmed iron anomalies along the Dray fence line." She placed a map beside them. "Every anomaly corresponds to a fence post position on the original property boundary, not the tree line. The fence." Webb's surveyor shifted. The gallery murmured. Ellen unwrapped the second cloth. A length of rusted chain, heavy with an old padlock still attached. June said, "This chain hung on the gate at the western boundary from 1943 until 1998. The padlock is stamped Mueller Hardware, Est. 1938. The chain proves continuous physical access and maintenance of the fence line at the fence, not the tree line, for over 50 years. Webb's attorney stood. "Your Honor, a chain." "Sit down." 2 people in the gallery exchanged glances. Ellen unwrapped a leather-bound book. Cracked spine, pages yellowed. June opened it to a bookmarked page. This is Helen Dray's Farm Journal, 1961. Entry dated March 14, replaced posts on western fence line. Used cedar from the south lot. Greer boys helped. Boundary hasn't moved since Mother said it in 19. She flipped to another page. September 1972, new survey clerk came by. Drew the tree line on a map. Told him the boundary is the fence, not the trees. He shrugged. The courtroom went still. Ellen unwrapped the last cloth. A photograph, black and white, mounted on cardboard. June held it up. This is a photograph of Marion Dray and Mr. Brausbelt. Greer standing on either side of the newly built fence in 1919. The iron stakes are visible in the ground. The fence line is clear. She placed the photograph beside the modern metal detection map. The stakes in this photograph are in the exact positions where metal detection found iron in the ground last month. The boundary has not moved in 105 years. She looked at Webb. The tree line moved. The fence didn't, and the boundary was never the tree line. The courtroom didn't make a sound. Webb sat motionless. His satellite image still glowed on the laptop screen, showing a tree line that, as of this morning, meant nothing. The judge was quiet for a moment. "The quiet title action is denied," he said. The court finds that the western boundary of the Dray property is the original fence line, established in 1919 and maintained continuously for 105 years. The 1974 deed reference to tree line was a clerical error inconsistent with the physical, historical, and documentary evidence. He looked at Webb. 12 acres is a lot of land. I suggest you recheck your other boundaries. The gavel came down once. Outside, Evan's neighbor, old Ben Whitmore, the retired surveyor, was waiting. "You beat a developer with a toolbox," he said. Ellen closed the lid. "I didn't beat anyone. My grandmother beat him in 1919. She just didn't know she'd need the proof." A reporter asked, "Were you nervous?" Ellen looked at the toolbox. "This box has been in the barn since before I was born. Every tool in it did a job. Stakes hold a fence. Chain locks a gate. A journal records the truth." She paused. "I just asked them to do their jobs one more time." 6 months later, Marcus Webb quietly withdrew plans with a portion of his subdivision that would have used the disputed 12 acres as a road easement. He did not sell his 400 acres. He did not develop them. The land sat empty. Ellen went back to work. The 84 acres stayed in the family. The hay barn stayed standing. The access road stayed open. That fall, her daughter brought her own children to the farm for the first time in 3 years. And the toolbox sat on its shelf in the barn, lid closed, latch catching the light, right next to Marion Dray's work gloves, stiff with age, small for a woman who had built a boundary that lasted a century.